Hello everyone, welcome to another slideshow here on my channel. I'm Cody, and today we'll be taking a look at Turkey's brand new, first of its kind, sort of, drone carrier, the TCG Anadolu. This topic comes courtesy of a poll over on my community tab here on YouTube, so don't forget to check that out. Plus, if you have any thoughts, comments, pop them down below and I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have. Just like the last couple of videos, I'm actually going to be starting with the credits. So of course we got to start with wikis for all the basic information. Then we've got some articles from Jane's and BulgarianMilitary.com talking about the F-35 dispute. We also have some pretty recent news in regards to Turkey's Hürjet's maiden flight. Last but most definitely not least, some inspirations and recommendations here on YouTube. From the more informational sub-brief to the more anime and a little out there animarchy. If you want ship talk, these guys are great channels to check out. So why is this important? I mean, Turkey's not a major naval power, right? Well, kind of. If we're looking globally, yeah, they aren't a big blue water navy. Very few countries are. But if we're looking regionally speaking, 100%. Especially now that the TCG Anadolu is starting to catch some tasty waves. Now, it should be noted that I don't believe it's fully finished yet. It's just kind of going on its first actual commissioned run. They haven't necessarily tested any of like the drone takeoff and landing stuff that I've seen, at least. If you have seen any footage or photos of that, please let me know in the comments below. Turkey may be the premier naval power not only in the Black Sea, but also a major contender in the Mediterranean. If this vessel were to operate in NATO or UN missions, it could be particularly useful, as it's pretty much the only carrier-type warship that can transit the Black Sea to the Med and back, well, at least without having to go through a whole rigmarole from the Turkish government. We'll talk more about that particular thing in a minute, but this is actually a pretty big deal. So we have to start with the ship itself, its history, its production, its specifications, all that good stuff. Then we'll take a look at its complement of aircraft or supposed aircraft, from drones to light aircraft and helicopters, all the fun stuff. Then we'll take a look at some of its possible operational areas, the international implications of a vessel like this, and of course we'll round out the video with my personal thoughts. The TCG Anadolu started its life back in 2018 with its keel being laid at the Sedef Shipbuilding Industries in Istanbul. However, its lineage goes back further to the late 2000s with Spain's Juan Carlos I class amphibious assault ship. Commissioned for the Spanish Navy back in 2010, this ship operates not only as an amphibious assault ship, but also a light aircraft carrier for VTOL aircraft like the Harrier II and F-35s. As Turkey was originally part of the F-35 program and the Anadolu was initially planned to carry F-35Bs, things would change because the Turkish government decided they wanted to purchase a Russian S-400 SAM system, but they were kicked out of the F-35 program as a result. So without the aircraft for the role in question, the Anadolu had to be reoriented to serve more as a helicopter and drone carrier. With tensions with the U.S. and the aversion of most U.S. lawmakers, it's doubtful that Turkey's ever going to be inducted back into the F-35 program in the near future, if ever again. So the ship itself, it comes in at 761 feet 2 inches or 232 meters. Its beam is 105 feet or 32 meters. Its draught is 22 feet and 8 inches or 6.9 meters. It has quite a bit going on in the propulsion arena with 8,000 kilowatts or 11,000 horsepower, Navtia manned diesel generators, 2 11 megawatt or 15,000 horsepower Siemens S-Pods. We have 2 1,500 kilowatt or 2,000 horsepower bow thrusters as well. Speed, the top speed at least noted, once again not really tested, 21 knots or 39 kilometers per hour or 24 miles per hour. It has a nautical range of 9,000 nautical miles, or a range of 9,000 nautical miles, 17,000 kilometers or 10,000 miles with an operational span of about 50 days without needing to check into port or being resupplied. It has quite a bit going on in the sensory and processing systems as well. Once again, a lot of this can change as time goes on, and these are the type of systems that would be either changed in a refit or updated in the near future, as pretty much most of the physical aspects of the ship are going to relatively remain the same. So, there you all. That's just a big thing for ships, as a bunch of radar systems, combat management systems, different sub-sensors, and I don't mean like submarine sensors, just like actual subsystems and stuff, navigation systems, and of course torpedo defense systems. There. And then you have an armament with 1 RAM, 2 Phalanx CIWS, and 5 25mm Aslan Stop RCWS remote weapons systems. So starting off with its aircraft complement, and we'll talk about helicopters first because they're probably the easiest as far as like actually getting working, because they don't really need nearly as much equipment on board to actually stop these. These really, the only thing they need from the Anadolu is fuel, armaments, and some way to be secured to the deck or below deck. So, starting off with the top-line attack helicopters, they can carry 4 T-129 attack, ATAK helicopters, which you see down there in the bottom right, or eventually the T-929 attack 2, which is pictured just to the left of that, which is still actively in development. I believe its first engine starting ceremony or trial or something happened a couple weeks ago. So those are the attack helicopters. Look kind of like Apache, well, not really Apaches, but you know what an attack helicopter looks like. Then they could carry 8 of the AS-532 or CH-47F helicopters, which you see there in the middle. These are transport helicopters, usually for cargo or a large amount of troops. And then you have 2 of the S-70B Seahawks up there in the top right. Now, any helicopter that, or rotary wing aircraft the Turks wanted to use, relatively speaking, could pretty easily be used off of the Anadolu. But tentatively, these are kind of what it's assumed to be using in at least the near future. So as far as drones go, the only 2 that we've seen note of are the Bayraktar 3, or the TB3, which is just the naval version of the TB2. It has the folding wings, and as you see there, maybe some ERA. But this and the Kilsalema, which I'm pretty sure I have mispronounced super hard, were photographed on top of the Anadolu, but once again, we haven't actually seen footage or test flights from either of these 2 vehicles off of the Anadolu. So eventually it will probably come to that, but we haven't seen it yet. These are the 2 drones. Of course, the TB3 going to be just like the TB2 in terms of its mission set, its reconnaissance, its loitering. It carries some small munitions to an extent. So it's pretty capable. We've seen it work well in the Armenian-Azerbaijani war, and then we've seen it do quite a bit of work, at least in the TB2 configuration in Ukraine. Now, as far as the Kilsalema, the big stealthy-looking guy on the right, we haven't actually seen that take off or be used in combat, or take off from the Anadolu or be used in combat. So, it is what it is. This might be a little bit more of a combat air patrol type thing, as far as much as you can with a drone, I suppose. But we don't really know. We've not seen it, and it's not something that has been tested, so we don't know what its role will inevitably be, but at least these are the 2 big drones that will be operating off the Anadolu at some point. Then for the light attack aircraft, we initially were seen to have about 10 F-35Bs taking off from the Anadolu or being housed on it. Once again, Turkey's probably never going to get back into the F-35 program or be allowed to purchase F-35s anytime soon. So that's pretty much gone, unfortunately. But as a possible option, once again, we've not necessarily seen this. This is more just a rumor. Once the TAI Hearjet is operational, the concept of like a light naval fighter might be operable off of it, which is kind of why it still has the ski jump. And of course, the drones potentially would use the ski jump as well, but this would need it much more so, I'd believe, than this other two. And yeah, with the Hearjet having its maiden flight and going through the paces of kind of getting to that point where it gets to production, it may get to the point where it comes out of that training role and becomes a light attack aircraft like something like the L-39. And then, of course, it has some landing capability as well. And funny fact, the Altay that we spoke about a couple weeks ago, actually, one of the test models was loaded onto the Anadolu to be taken somewhere to do some testing. So that's pretty cool. But you have a couple of different types of landing craft. You have your more traditional kind of troop lander, and then you have the hovercraft that can carry bigger pieces of equipment, whether it's vehicles or building equipment, as you kind of see there in the middle. But yeah, so this is still going to have a lot of the amphibious assault ship DNA in it because, well, for the most part, it is an amphibious assault ship that's just going to carry drones. That's really the only difference. And yeah, you still have the capability of transversing the Black Sea if you need to, or going out and then down into the Mediterranean and going wherever you need to with a relatively reasonable detachment of troops and equipment. Now, the operational areas are going to be a little bit more of a speculation. We know it could work out of the Black Sea. Obviously, it's kind of the only big remaining naval power there, save for what's left of the Russian Black Sea fleet. But it is something that they do have quite a few ships in the Black Sea. Now, probably the most important part we'll talk about on the next slide is traversing from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, but something that the Turks and the Greeks have had quite a few spats over in the last for a while. As you see there are a lot of little island chains coming out between Greece and the Turkish mainland, and then, of course, down into the Eastern Mediterranean, down there with Cyprus and down by Lebanon and Israel, then down into kind of the Suez Canal. All of that is area the Turks operate in, and this is something that really expands their capability. Now, they could go... The ship, technically, from a ranging standpoint, could go out to the Atlantic, but there's really no reason for it to. This ship is most likely going to pretty much exclusively act in Turkish interests, so there's no real reason. It'll probably, if it does, it's to get to the other coast of the western coast of Africa, but it's probably going to operate in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea primarily. Now, part of that is because it is limited in its escort capability. Now, if it did operate more in a NATO task force, you have a little bit more capability there. But as far as escort ships, we're largely relegated to frigates of differing roles, whether it's multi-role, anti-submarine, or guided missiles. Here are all of the numbers they have currently, and they're not going to have near the same range necessarily that the Anadolu has. And then you have some support ships. You have a couple of different classes of tankers, replenishment oilers, logistics assistant ships. And these are going to be things necessary if you're staying out at sea a long time. Once you get past that 50-day mark, if you're not going into port, you're going to need help from some of these types of ships. And this is not really a carrier task force. This is not a carrier strike group. There's really a lot of question as to whether this would even be something that could really defend the Anadolu in a large number, especially if you're looking against other fairly reasonably powerful regional navies. Now, that being said, the Anadolu is pretty much not going to need, like, it's not going up against blue water navies, so it's not necessarily as concerned about those types of problems as, say, the US, or the Japanese, the Chinese, the British, or the French navies. As far as international implications go, we come to the Sea Marmara, and it is an interesting little plot of water. So as you see here, this is pretty much Turkish territory. This, along with the Montreux Convention, pretty much puts this under Turkey's purview. So if the Turks do not want you to transverse naval vessels through this area, you can't, right? And of course, NATO is going to respect that because, well, we don't really want to piss the Turks off and cause fractions in the alliance, or fractures in the alliance, and the Russians aren't going to do it because, well, why would they? They probably have more problems getting there than the actual political ramifications. So this pretty much leaves the Turkish Navy as the only navy that can openly traverse this area without any political jockeying needing to happen. So from a military perspective, of a hard power projection, this gives the Turks a lot of sway in the region. Now, as a larger geopolitical thing, it's not nearly as big of a deal. You don't really have a lot of major navies traversing this regularly anyway. But this is something that, for the context of the Russo-Ukrainian War, is pretty important. This is pretty much the reason you've not seen any, it's at least one of the reasons, you've not seen any NATO combat vessels traverse this area. Part of it's also, they don't want to be a potential problem in terms of accidentally getting fired on by the Russians. But yeah, this is why you don't see any NATO ships kind of going through and hanging out in the Black Sea regularly. And as far as a soft power thing, the Anadolu has a lot of capacity, so it could be used for humanitarian aid as well as forward power projection, just kind of in regional areas that Turkey is popular in, that they're trying to spread influence in. We'll look at that more, I believe, in the next slide. But this is why this is important, right? This is the only quote-unquote carrier-style craft that can traverse this stretch of water. It is probably going to stay that way. Once again, there are a lot of reasons NATO doesn't really need to be in the Black Sea actively, regularly, but, it is something that if the Turks didn't want you to, you're not going to do it anyway. So the Turks really kind of have the market cornered in this particular instance. Now, my personal thoughts, which is what I was kind of hinting at in that last slide, these are the areas that the Turks are relatively more prominent in. Now, of course, they do a lot with Azerbaijan. There's a lot of industry that goes up through Georgia into Turkey's mainland. They, of course, do a lot in Syria and northern Iraq. Of course, Cyprus. Then you get down into Africa and you see, okay, the Anadolu can make it to Libyan ports, Somalian ports. Now, of course, you're probably not going to go all the way around the country to get to the little sliver of kind of coastal land the Democratic Republic of the Congo would have. But being able to reach Libya and Somalia is a pretty big deal. And of course, you can airlift to other areas as well. But the Anadolu gives them a lot of capability in terms of stretching out a little bit further and being able to transport, whether it is humanitarian supplies or weaponry, to these regions. Now, will we see it in combat anytime soon? Probably not. But as far as future power projection, this is more of a long game type situation for the Turkish Navy than it is anything else. This also, kind of in line with that long game, puts Turkey as more of a regional pole of power, much like India is, than it is a larger part of NATO, right? Turkey is one of the few countries that could do this, and they pretty much have been for a while. This is why you have kind of such a split amongst the kind of NATO countries and Turkey. It's not necessarily that most of the countries are hostile, obviously, but there are a lot of political disagreements and how kind of Turkey operates itself, and of course Greece with all those islands in the Aegean, and Cyprus is a whole nother thing. But you don't really see France or the UK or Spain or Germany to a large extent doing anything similar, and the Italians, I guess, to a slight degree. The Turks, this is much more of a, hey, we're not really European necessarily. We're our own thing. We are our own pole of power. We're like, they're in the top 3 as far as like a just specific number of military personnel, I believe, or just military power in NATO, in Europe at least, kind of omitting the US. They're up there with the France, the Germany, the UK style powers. And this is largely because they've been doing things, right? They have their own regional conflicts that if they're not directly involved in, they have some stuff going on, right? Sending TB2s to Azerbaijan, even, they purchased them, but whatever, and seeing how well that does and pushing forward their drone capabilities. So yeah, Turkey, I don't know is ever going to be a world superpower, but I do think it could be something like its own pole, like India is, probably just to a slightly smaller degree. But those are my thoughts on the topic. Let me know in the comments down below, how do you feel about it? Does the Anadolu really change things for Turkey? Or is it just a really big mistake investment that was meant for the F-35 that they just doubled down on? Anyway, thanks for sticking with me. I'll see you in the next one.